There are so many wonderful Christian ladies out there who are just looking for a really decent man of good character. They really are.
Yep.
You want me to introduce you?
He's got one. He's got
Yeah.
great.
You've got one, all right.
Yeah.
When are you going to marry her?
Jim. Only once you start Jim's marriage.
Yes!
You better not put me on the chest. I might demand.
Jim, shake on it. What is that?
Jim's officiating.
Yo, what's up? Welcome back to another episode of the Disruption Podcast. What is this? 264 or something like that.
Yes.
It's been a while. Snow the Baghdaddy.
It's Chief Olasoji in the building, baby.
It's your girl Mowing.
And it's completely different settings.
Yes, it is.
We are joined by the one and only Jim Penman.
Round of applause for Jim. Yes.
You may not know him by his full name, but you definitely know his face. I think it's one of the most
One of the little point.
Yeah.
Just a little point real
one
quick.
of the most recognizable faces in Australia. Funny enough, the way this episode came about was my friend was like, I need to get a car detailing. And so she searches it up and then she's like, Jim's car detailing. Jim does everything. And I think that's kind of like, then I was just chatting to people and I was like, oh my gosh, like I think we might chat to Jim and all this. And they're like, Jim's a real person?
Yeah.
Do you get that often? The whole...
Oh, yeah.
Sad story of my life.
I had somebody ask me once, you said, you're from Jim's, are you? And I said, yes, I am. He said, is there really a Jim? And I said, yes, there is. She said, have you met him?
What was the response? What do you give as a response in that moment?
Oh, I just smiled and walked away.
Yeah, leave it at that. But yes, we are definitely indeed joined by none other than Jim from the iconic Jim's Mowing, and all the other things that come under that, which we'll probably get into throughout the episode today. But how you feeling?
Yeah, good.
Yeah, busy start to the week already, I'm sure.
Lots of good stuff.
Yeah, already on a Monday. Yeah, I think I was listening on the drive here just to an episode or like a podcast. I think the askJim series that you've done.
Yeah.
And I was kind of shocked by how many people are part of the gym community, like the gym's community or gym's group community. I don't even know how many people that number actually racks up to be right now, but I'm like, the different backgrounds as well is crazy. How many people is that in that community?
Well, about 5,500 franchisees,
Yeah.
but quite a few workers, obviously, too. A lot of them
Yeah.
have employees, so counting family members, tens of thousands.
Yeah.
What made you... Your background is not in trade classically, is it?
No, my background was I wanted to be an academic.
Okay.
I did a PhD in history back in the 70s, early 80s, and aimed to understand the reason for the rise and fall of civilizations of all things, and found myself absolutely, completely out of any potential for an academic job. So I turned my part-time mowing business into a growing concern.
Okay, wow. That academic side is something I want to touch on later, but I think more with the mowing, then what made you go, all right, let's turn this from just Jim doing Jim's mowing to all these other facets?
Well, it wasn't really my idea in the beginning. We were franchising mowing quite well, and it was going well. And then we thought, why don't we try this with, say, cleaning? But this guy with a beard and a hat, which was what I looked like in those days, that's a gardening image. So I said, like, that's not going to work for cleaning. So we actually did this other company called Sunlight and little sprays and stuff, and we signed a couple of franchises, put them out, couldn't find them work, gave them the money back. And somebody come to me and said, what about Jim's cleaning? And I said, no, because that's a gardening image. It's a guy with a beard and a hat. What's a woman going to do going to somebody's house? And they said, we think it'll work. And I said, I don't think it will. And they said, we're sure to work. I said, I don't think it will. They said, okay, we'll give it a try. We'll go in with you and make it work. So I said, well, right, give it a try. And it worked.
Yeah.
So what can I say? The brand just becomes a brand. I mean, let's face it, Virgin was originally a music store.
Yeah.
Now it's an airline. It's a cola. It's brands have a life of their own.
Yeah.
Are you ever afraid to try like a different kind of outlet or space?
I'm not afraid to try, but sometimes we've got to recognise the things we don't do so well. We're very good on service industries.
Yeah.
If somebody's phoning up or booking in for a service, we go out, provide a quote. That kind of thing we're very good at. We've tried other kinds of things like trade exchange or like health clubs. Not our area.
Yeah.
Gyms.
Yeah, it's a very different business though. See, you might think that mowing and cleaning and pest control and test and tag and antennas, they're all very different technically, but in their structure, they're very, very similar. But a retail franchise, whether it's food or whether it's gym memberships, is very different. We don't know how to do that.
Yeah, that's funny. I remember when I was studying marketing, one of my lecturers, he was telling us about BIC, like the pens and lighters and stuff. And he was like, what do they focus on? Pens, lighters, and razors. Plastic things that you hold with one hand. And I was like, oh, then it makes so much sense why they go, oh, that's kind of our niche in a sense. What is one area that you're like, okay, there's, because the list of Jim's businesses are endless. But what's one that you're like, I have no desire to enter this one?
Call girls.
All girls.
Jim's on the fence.
Rolls off the tongue.
Yeah, well, I think my Baptist church would get upset if I got this.
Yeah, get yourself involved.
I'd probably draw the line of Jim's pushes and
Yeah.
a few things like that.
Yeah.
Stuff that I think is not in good moral
Yeah.
taste, I wouldn't do.
I think I heard you say in one of the podcasts that I've listened to, fast food as well, something you wouldn't tap into.
No, I wouldn't.
How
Because
come?
they're so good at what they do. You
Like
look at a company
Atheist,
like
yeah.
McDonald's. McDonald's is it's disgusting food. Right? And I don't eat it, and I will not have my children eat it.
Yeah.
With any choice of mine. But as a franchise organisation, they are very good at what they do.
Yeah.
Great training. My son, 15 years old, get a job at McDonald's.
Yeah.
Just don't eat the stuff, but go and get a job there and learn how to discipline yourself, learn how to work, to take responsibility. It's a great training ground. They're very good at what they do. I wouldn't dream of competing with them.
I'm interested in. I want to take it back a little bit. Even then, we've mentioned in terms of how you started, as well as we're just beginning with part time, and then the research and all that kind of stuff. But what was like family life and upbringing, and even childhood like? I think because I think those are important and part of the stepping stones of even where someone ends up. Becoming.
Well, my father was an engineer at a university, and later on went off by himself as a consultant. Mother was school teacher, mainly at home when we were kids. Good family, I guess, respectable middle class. We didn't have a lot of money. I mean, by the standards of today, we were, like soft drink was at Christmas and chicken. Right. That was something you just didn't normally have. Holidays was in a tent. We just lived a fairly, we didn't feel we were poor. We weren't. Right. But my parents were very articulate. Argumentative, especially my father's.
Yeah, right.
I didn't always get on well with him especially when I was a teenager. I wouldn't speak to him once for 6 months because he told me to shut up at the dinner table. Because I'd argue with him all the time.
Yeah.
But he's a good guy. I was very good friends with my father before he died.
What because you talk a lot about even like family now, and even in regards to some of the writings as well, and part of the concepts and themes that you have. What I guess principles do you think you learned and were instilled in you from that time as well?
Well, my parents were very pro-education, pro-hard work, I guess, pretty enterprising, typical, upper middle class people.
Yeah.
I think I learned, if you look at the way I run my business and my ideals, they're a lot more to do with my Christian walk rather than anything specific about my upbringing.
Okay, yeah,
my parents were not churchgoers.
Yeah.
I became a Christian later in life, but things like the Jesus washing his disciples' feet, the idea of servant leadership is very fundamental to the way I think about things, and suspicion of wealth. It's harder for the camel to go, each man went to the kingdom of heaven and the camel to go through the eye of the needle, that kind of idea. And then the parable of the talents, using the gifts that God's given you. I think to understand what I've done, because my values are very different from those of my family. I've got 10 children. I love kids, and I'm a strong churchgoer. My siblings are basically atheists, and they've got like 3 kids between them. It's very different values.
Yeah. Okay. So you grew up in a non-Christian household?
Yeah, fundamentally, yeah.
Yeah, and then become a Christian later in life. What sparked that, triggered that for you?
Inner hunger. I didn't recognize, actually. I just felt this emptiness, this need. There was something that deeply attracted me. I didn't believe in God. I was an atheist, very outstanding, articulate atheist for a long time. And just at the age of 28, I was still at university then, and I was walking through the Union building in our orientation week, and I got talking to some Christian kids at the Christian Union, and I got to like them, and I went on a retreat with them, and then just had this powerful sense that God was calling me.
Yeah, right.
So I switched sides.
Because I guess sometimes you have, I think it's interesting you mentioned that you had the opportunity to then go and like almost form a relationship with certain people, with the the students in the building, go on retreat and whatnot. But it wasn't anything that was necessarily attractive in the instant moment that you met them, or was it kind of developed?
I just like them.
Yeah.
We come to God through other people.
Yeah.
Not so much. You're not sitting in a desert and suddenly God speaks to you. I mean, it may happen to some people, but that's not normally how it mostly works. Mostly you get to know people, you get to like them. They've got something. There's something about them that appeals to you. And then when you become part of that group, then God enters in.
Yeah. You know what's crazy? It's not often that there'll be so many people that have used your services.
Yeah.
I'm sure you also let the franchisees do and run the business how they want to, obviously following your model.
With very strong limits in terms of customer service,
Yeah.
which they often object to. They really do. They kick back on the top.
Yeah, right.
Very, very tough.
Yeah. So pretty strict parameters.
Strong principles of support the franchisee, strong principles of customer service, very strict, very extreme, you might say, by the standards of the industry.
Yeah. And you're saying that's ultimately influenced even by your Christian principles and ideals as well. Yeah.
We put franchisees first. Our first priority is the welfare of franchisees. That's on right at the top. We're also passionate about customer service, but there's no conflict because if you look after customers well, franchisees do better. You get more leads, and individual franchisees are better off. We know that because if you've got we have a fairly good success rate. People who go into business as independents, between 5 and 10% will last the first year. With us, it's around 88%. That's the historical figure. 88% will last their first year. Now, 12% fail though. That's a really bad figure. But if you look at why they fail, one of the things you'll notice is they tend to not give such good customer service. And even less than what we normally do, even looking after 8 out of 10 customers well, you're much more likely to succeed than if you look after 10 out of 10 customers well. And we also find if you look at reports of income, we ask people whether their income is good, satisfactory, poor. Now, on average, 91% will say good or satisfactory, 9% poor. But again, if you look at those who report poor, far more likely to be those who give poor customer service. Not universal, not at all. You can have exceptions to anything, but generally speaking, the better your customer service, the more likely you are to report good income, the less likely you are to fail and leave the business.
That's good, and given it'll come back to you, but they didn't listen to that principle that you gave them. Hey. Yeah, I just thought it's pretty interesting to realize that a lot of people, they wouldn't have known that this is run by someone who has faith that they profess as well. I think, especially typically we look at successful people, and not many times do we ever connect maybe faith-driven decisions to those people. And I think maybe the church sometimes runs away from success too, or having successful people within they can speak about, and or people who've done amazing things in finances. And I think no one would ever know.
But you also have terrible heretical heresies too. The prosperity gospel is what I describe. The idea that just because if you are faithful, you will be prosperous. A lot of very good people aren't very prosperous.
Sure.
And a lot of the best people I know are not wealthy at all. It's not. I like what Jesus said about the subject. You've got to be very careful. But anything we get is a gift from God, is to be used for His purposes. It's not for ourselves.
I'm trying to, without getting into your pockets here, right?
Ask what you like.
Open book.
What are your thoughts? Oh, just for context, I don't know if you gathered, all of us are Christian as well. We all go to the same church. What are your thoughts when it comes to tithes?
You pay tithes.
So your church must love you.
Well, I don't necessarily know. I just plug it in the account every. I do it in terms of my personal income, which is of course a lot less than what the company makes.
Yeah, of course.
I very simple. It's a biblical commandment.
Yep.
You give tithes, it just goes in straight away. It's very easy, automatic. It's just the thing that
You don't have to think about it.
plugs it in. And look, I have a principle too. Again, God gives us resources to be used for what He wants. Now, actual fact, I would give away something like 80% of the money that I make from gyms. Only two things though. One of them is tithing, which is not optional.
Yep.
And the other is my research project, which is what I think God has called me to do, which is why I built gyms in the first place.
Okay.
That's so interesting that you say that as well, because it sounds like, all right, I've been called to a research project, but then this has been the journey.
Yeah.
So ultimately,
Yeah.
the tool used to help feeding into that. Like that's quite a journey.
Until I failed as an academic,
Yeah.
I never had any thought of becoming rich. I really am very indifferent. I mean, if you look at my clothes, this is Kmart. This is like Kmart. This is my uniform, of course.
Yeah.
I don't actually pay for it. This comes from the company. I don't live
You don't care for
luxuriously.
it.
Yeah.
The first time I ever bought a new car was just under 2 years ago. First time in my life I've ever
Yeah,
bought a
wow.
new car because I wanted electric.
Yeah, wow.
It's good for the environment, but I don't have material wants like that.
What is something that you enjoy spending? Is it holidays? Is it like are there experiences that you're like, this is something that I'd love to put some of my wealth towards, or my
Well, it's my research project.
okay.
I'm very actively involved. I have a research project which is going. We're spending about $3 million a year currently on basic research into biology, epigenetics, and so forth, which we think has tremendous impact. And I'm writing this book, as I mentioned before, about the birth rate crisis, why the fertility is dropping down. You know,
Globally, sorry, or
sorry,
did you say globally with that birth rate specifically, or
globally, yeah,
yeah.
particularly in the wealthy countries.
Yeah.
So why is that happening? And it's got to do with psychology, which has got to do with biology, which has got to do with epigenetics. There is solutions to these things, and it comes to a problem in our society, become very individualistic, very selfish, very focused on achievement, very turning away from God, turning away from group ideas, and that's devastating to a society, and it's killing us. And we can and we should reverse it.
It's interesting that group ideas and group thinking, I would say, has almost been branded in it's a very scary, stay away from that kind of conversation. That's bad. Very outrightly, no, we don't. Everyone needs to think, have their own mind and their own thoughts, and that's kind of how we look at a lot of thinking and thoughts in our side of the world. But we do come from very community-oriented roots and origins as humanity, but even from our own individual like cultures and backgrounds and whatnot. It's always community and the group circle, how does the herd or the group think. But it's interesting that we come to a time in society, but then or a time in the world, but then also specifically where we live as well, where you are kind of pushed definitely a lot more into focusing on like the I and on myself. So I know there's a balance between that for sure that needs to happen, but it is quite detrimental sometimes when we don't look at how our individualized kind of look on life has pretty serious ramifications on like the rest of the world. And it's interesting that you've also now linked that then to birth rate attrition as well.
Yeah. So why do people not have children? Why do they wait so long? Because they want to get established. They want to have the house paid off. They want to have, or at least a house paid for to some degree. They want to have career progression and so forth, because the individual. Now, I started having kids when I was broke lawn mowing contractor. My wife was at home. She was a student, and then a mother, obviously. And I didn't have any assets. Didn't own a house. Didn't have anything. I just wanted to have kids. That to me is a purpose in life, and somehow God will provide. We'll work out how to pay for it. You just got to. What's your priority? And to me, status, wealth, success is never a priority. It's a means to a goal, of a more important goal. That's it.
When did this decrease start? Do you, according to your research and what you're writing right now, when did we start having this crisis of people not wanting to have children now?
Well, it happened at least a century ago. You look at the declining birth rate; it's been going down for 100, 150 years. As we become more individualistic, this focus on success, wealth, individual is a problem. You look at this. You look at groups that resist this, like for example the Amish or Orthodox Jews, for example, or to a lesser extent people like Latter-day Saints, Mormons. They have very strong sense of structure, of strong culture, very strong community values, strong organization, separation from the outside world. Like if you're a Mormon, you don't have tea, coffee, alcohol, tobacco. You do things differently. And it's a very involved way of life. And I was in that church for many years, actually, which theologically is strange, but it's a wonderful organization. That's the kind of people that tend to have more kids, because you put other priorities. I mean, God, community, your children, your wife, your husband. These are more important than individual success. And I think this worship of success. It's strange now, because you're talking to me. If I was some homeless drifter living in the gutter, you wouldn't be interviewing me, would you? I mean, honestly.
Yeah.
No, I'd be interested.
But we wouldn't have anyone to say.
Yeah, we wouldn't set up anyway.
Well, be honest. I wouldn't get too many
No, you're right.
requests
You're
for.
right.
You talk to me because I'm financially successful.
Yeah.
Yet in a sense, my message is it's not the most important thing. There's a pastor in our church. wonderful guy called Bill, and I was invited to his birthday party some time back, and his wife actually arranged for everybody there, including ourselves, to talk about what Bill has done. And there was this incredible outpouring of just the way he blessed so many people, the sheer decency, the kindness, how much he contributed. Now, Bill's never going to be rich. I don't think they pay pastors an awful lot,
No.
not even
That
our
well.
church, which is the biggest church.
Yeah.
But the way to me, he's an amazing success as an individual. Far more so than a lot of people who've got a lot more money than he has.
It's almost like a bit of a Solomon message as well, though, because you've had the opportunity
To figure out
to figure that out.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. Let me find out.
Let me find out as well. That might be the thought of a lot of people, but
I didn't have a different attitude when I was much poorer. I mean, I was struggling really, really a lot in the early days. You had a situation where you can't pay your power bill, you can't pay your phone bill, you can't pay your tithe. Okay, what do? You pay the tithe first, and then somehow God looks after other things. You've got to do that.
How do people take you when you speak like this in other settings? Very corporate, you know, and these are the principles you live by. How does one?
They're probably a bit puzzled. Who is this nutcase? I mean, it doesn't make sense. When you're in the kingdom, you understand these things, and it's a way of thinking that we can all share. We find the bonds of Christian groups is very powerful. I've got a life group that I sort of lead coordinate in our church. It's one of the ways that I try to serve, and because you're Christians together, you're discussing. We have a lot of fun too. We all had an uproarious game of cheat last night, the other night or Saturday, which I'm very good at. You know, cheat.
Card one, yeah.
I'm really good at cheat.
Yeah.
I am so good at it.
As calling other people or being the cheater?
But both.
Okay, right.
I call cheats. I cheat outrageously. I look at people's cards. I'll do anything. I cheat like mad. Okay, so that doesn't quite fit with my orthodox. But the point
cheater
is,
side.
as a group, we have great fun together, but we also share.
Yeah.
And we pray for each other. We're really concerned about each other's concerns and our families and so forth. And that's a very powerful bond that people they find it hard to have in a different community.
Yeah.
That's so true, because I remember I'd finished high school, gotten out, and all my friends from school were constantly on this thing of, I feel like I don't know my friends anymore, I don't see my friends anymore. And I was like, I don't have this problem. I see my closest friends 3 times a week at least through church stuff, all this kind of stuff. And then I was always like, whenever weddings came around or funerals came around, there was just always this group of people that were willing to chip in and help out and be there. Not even chip in financially, chip in terms of their time to set up and pack down and all this stuff. And I was just thinking to myself, like, where do you find this outside of a Christian or religious community in general? And I don't know where people find that, especially now in a more individualistic society. Yeah, it does seem kind of rough.
The best places to look for it if you don't have faith, and the community of faith is the best place to look. I mean, that's from that point of view. It doesn't matter whether you're Christian or Jewish or Muslim or anything. Some of the best people I know are actually practicing Muslims. They're wonderful people. But if you don't have that, the best kind of organisation is one that's doing something of value. Like people like Masons and those kinds of groups that have a common purpose, maybe the CFA. If you're working together for a common role. Now, as Christians, we have that in spades because our whole way of thinking about things, our whole life is
Purposeful.
supposed to be focused on doing God's will. But to any extent that you helping other people as a group, that is the best bond. You know, they talk about the value of money, and money is a very interesting subject. I read a lot about what makes people happy. People think that if you have a bigger house, a better car, better clothes, fancier holidays, you're going to be happier. It's not true. It's not true. The relationship between wealth and happiness is very slight when it gets past about average Australian income. Now, which is about what our franchisees make in actual fact. Now, when they look at what makes people happy with spending money, there is a pattern. First of all, buying status goods really doesn't do much for you at all. You win the lottery, in 12 months' time, you're just about the same happiness you were before. Same as if you become paraplegic. It's amazing. We spring back. So buying stuff, trying to look better than somebody else. Theodore Roosevelt said, social comparison is a thief of joy. It's a really true statement. Comparison with other people, whether it's social media, likes, whether it's buying expensive stuff, doesn't bring happiness. Better is actually community, doing things with people, doing things with other people, experiences, okay, like with your family, with your friends, banding together. That's actually a better way to spend money. But you know the number one thing that's best to spend money on? This is not this is not Christians talking. This is scientists who've done this. They said, give your money away to a cause that you are involved with. That is number one, the way to spend money to create happiness. The absolute opposite to what the world would say, but that's true. That's what scientists have found.
Yeah, well,
That's very interesting, actually. I wonder where that was done, even that kind of those typical studies and what kind of groups of people. But it's interesting that giving it away. Again, given shall come on to your,
I'm actually working on another book. I'm working on about 5 books at the present.
how does one do that in one time?
One of them is called it's something like the Health and Happiness Handbook, Principles of Health and Happiness. What makes you, the kinds of principles that you can use for that. And that's one, hey, what do you do with money?
I think it's probably also because there's some kind of a joy attached to being able to see money bring about good fruits as well, especially something like you're saying that you're passionate about as well. You almost have that sense of ownership of like, this, not necessarily I did this, but I was a part of this story. I was a part of this. That's a different type of happiness or joy.
It is, and it works very well. They've done studies again. I read probably on average about 2 books a week, so I'm constantly recommending. I blizzard people with recommendations about books, and they found that, for example, if you get help, you'll actually have a certain increase to your happiness. But the number one thing you can do? Give help. If you help somebody else, you actually have a bigger benefit in terms of happiness than almost anything you can do. Helping somebody else. But that's science. This is just looking at it.
Yeah. In regards to, especially your, I assume, is it history that you initially were going to study? Or?
Yeah.
But now you have a lot of conversations around like epigenetics and things like that as well. How do you then, what's your process of being able to marry up having a strong faith, but then also science? In a world that typically looks like those two things opposed to each other, how do you, rationalize or come to conclusions around the two?
Well, in a sense, my study led me to at least be open to faith, because when I was young, I got into trouble at school. I was a very outspoken, anti-Christian, free, I would put things up on the school notice board. And I went to a conservative Christians, Anglican school.
I was going to ask, was it a Christian school then as well?
Anglican school, in those days, very straight-laced. And I would put things on the notice board arguing for things like, liberalisation of homosexuality and all kinds of stuff, to which they'd take down because they were inappropriate. My best friend was suspended in year 12, said, stay away from this guy, he's a bad influence. So that's the kind of student I was, all right? So I was very much, hey, all these old-fashioned ideas about sexual morality and stuff, it's all garbage, it's all rubbish, it's all anti-scientific. But then I started to try and understand what makes society work. And I came to the conclusion that why societies flourish is because there is a change of character. And that change of character is driven by religious principles like chastity, like fasting, like Sabbath keeping, like all the principles in the psychology that we offer. And that creates a sort of character which is adapted to being successful in a civilized society. And when societies lose those characteristics, they tend to fall apart very fast. And when I looked at what that character came from, what I came to the conclusion was it's got to do with the biology that was evolved to help us deal with population limitations on population growth. So we're actually it's like an artificial fake mild hunger. And when you do things like all those religious principles, they actually create this character. So in a sense, I realized that the basis for everything, for civilized everything, is in religious principles, religious faith.
It's a very interesting.
And I was an atheist.
To come to that conclusion. Yeah, I think what's interesting around that is the fact that I think a lot of religious principles, and we can speak from the Christian perspective. You've probably been able to even research other religions as well. They constantly speak towards, I guess, life and bringing about life too. So it would be it makes sense that you could make the argument that it makes sense that removing that the absence of that starts to see a decline in those things that are promoting life or life promoting factors, I guess, sometimes. So.
There's 2 different ways to look at religion, actually. There's one way to look at it is this. If you had a problem with your washing machine, you would not go out to the car to get the manual for your Toyota or your Mitsubishi and bring it in and say, okay, how do I fix my washing machine? Why not? Because it's not the maker's manual. You actually get the manufacturer of the washing machine, LG, whoever it is, you get their manual and fix it. Now, in that case, I hope I am completely mechanically inept, but the principle is there. You look to the maker's manual. What's the Maker's Manual? For me, it's the Bible.
Yeah.
That's God's, the Creator's version of how we work best and how we achieve. Now, the other way to look at it from a purely non-faith-based point of view is that a faith is a cultural technology. It's a series of beliefs and practices that have been found to work effectively, that actually help people to succeed, to prosper, to have good families, to be able to support those families.
Yeah. And both, I assume most people would agree, are quite positive on society, if you look at it in those two ways there, for sure. Yeah, interesting. I want to think about how now you even go into how you manage like staff as well then, and how your Christian principles, or even just the way you live, you're quite outspoken, which is very which is cool and awesome. And then how do you though manage that when it comes to leadership as well? Because I'm sure not everyone that works with you agrees with your principles, for sure. So
Not everybody likes me. No.
yeah. So how do you then how do you then navigate that as a leader of an organization?
Look, I am genuinely concerned about my staff as well as my franchisees. They're part of my kind of extended family, my tribe. I really, just from its own point of view, I don't like people fail. I don't like them hurt. If you've got somebody who's not doing very well, you will try to give them something else. I had my sister who came to work for me some years back, and she was terrible. Just kept on. I gave her a job, and her co-worker said she is completely hopeless. She doesn't do anything. She delegates everything, including her own manager. She just was awful. So I tried another job. I tried about 3 or 4 different jobs, and I had to fire her in the end. And then she outed me on national TV. So thanks very much, brother, for that. Anyway, the point of it is, in the end, we all got to serve the concern. We serve our franchisees. You can't have somebody who's not doing their job, and sometimes it's very hard, but you've got to let somebody go. Yeah. At the same time, I want my staff to succeed. I want them to be healthy. I mean, I'm notorious. I go around poking people smoking and put free fruit in this country.
Yeah, right.
I want my staff to be happy, and I want them to be healthy, and I want them to be successful. And I like to listen to, if people have an idea, I want to hear what you think and what your ideas are, which actually is a good way of finding out. We've got a couple of staff, like Joel, that you come across.
Yeah.
He started at the most basic job imaginable because I got to know him and I saw his talent and listened to what he said. He's now one of our top managers, and he's just like, just had his first child. He's 32 years old. He's fantastic. But
that's a tick for you in your books as well, the birth rate. You need that.
People tend to have kids around me.
Yeah.
That's influence. Go forth and multiply. But in a good sense.
Yeah.
Right. In a good sense.
Right. I saw somewhere helping families spend more time together and make great income with the Jim's franchise is kind of the idea. You're really big on family.
Oh yes.
Like, where does that love for family come from? And then also, what does your family that you've created look like?
Well, temperamentally, I just love kids. I mean, I can't explain it in any other way. Since I was a teenager, I just loved children. I was always a Sunday school teacher when I became a Christian. I always wanted children, and I adored my own kids. Having said that, I'm a committed Christian. I've been divorced 3 times.
What's going on, Jim?
What's going on? Well, I have to say, I must be an incredibly difficult person to live with, which, if you know me well, you wouldn't be surprised at all. Even my current wife, married 23 years, and we're crazy in love with each other, but by jeepers have we had fights over the years. Really, really, I adore her. She's wonderful. But I'm difficult. There's no question. I'm very driven. I'm very blind to people. I don't know what's going on. I'm just so focused.
Yeah.
But I don't know. But I've got 10 kids, and
How
I get on with them.
are they spread out between the 4 wives? Is it
5 from my first marriage, and then there's 1 from my second, and 4 from my 4th wife.
Yeah.
I only count the ones that I actually see. I have 1 child I don't have contact with. It's his request.
Yeah.
And one of my children from my current wife is actually adopted, you might say. But 10 kids, and they're wonderful.
Yeah.
Most of them came. We had a late Father's Day gathering last night. It was wonderful just to see them and their partners. They got some great, my girls do so well. Got some fantastic husbands.
Yeah, that's awesome.
They're married well. As well.
They have to. Yeah.
Do they have much involvement in the business?
they've all worked in the business at one way or another sometime. At the moment, actually, one of my daughters and the partner is just starting Jim's removals. That's their own business in partnership kind of thing. So I've got some good heirs. I think one day, something my family will be able to take over Jim's.
Yeah.
But that's not an easy thing because you've got to be capable, but you've also got to have a sense of ethics. One of the things I've just done is I put clause into my contract.
Right.
I'm very nervous that when I'm dead, that somebody will come on and say, hey, here's Jim's group. You could make a fortune. You could treble the income, which you could do if you do certain things and they go and rip off franchisees blind. It wouldn't be difficult to do. I'm very scared of it happening. So what I've done is I put a clause in the contract, against the advice of my lawyer, I might say, which said that the controlling share of Jim's group cannot be sold without the written consent of a majority of franchisees.
Oh wow,
Because I'm so concerned. So
that's a big effort to get that anyway.
yeah, and they said that my boss said, you'll really decrease the value of the business if you do that. And I said, I don't give a stuff. I'm not going to have my business sold to people who are going to rip it off blind, rip my people off blind.
Have you ever thought of going into politics?
Yeah.
He's at his battle with politicians. We can get there.
I really have a thought that the next state election, I would like maybe to stand for the upper house of state parliament, because there's one issue that really gets my goat, and this is the business of unaffordable housing. People can't afford to buy houses, they can't afford to rent. It's a real terrible burden. People with property, like myself, are getting richer and richer because our property keeps on going up in value. We've done nothing for that. So what we need to do is to have a really big relaxation of the zoning laws. Let people build in the inner city. Let them build high-rise, let them build terraced houses, let them build 3- and 4-story near the railway stations and stuff. Let's have a livable city that's affordable. People can afford to actually buy a house when they're young and not have to save up and get through a fantastic mortgage. We did a sort of a spoof on that for April Fool's Day, where we actually, it was Jim for Premier. That was like a joke. But you know what's interesting? We've got 96% of the reaction was positive. There was a really strong feeling that what's going on is really evil. And I'm not a great fan of the state government, as you probably know from my past, but they have done some early stages to do things like people build things in their backyard. They're actually moving in the same direction. There is a movement going on. I would like to push that. Not necessarily to join any political party, but just to be part of a pressure group that say, okay, if you want our help, then let's have affordable housing. You can't have 500,000 people, immigrants in the country every year and build 50,000 houses. It's just unsustainable. It's unfair. It's wrong. It drives inequality.
Yeah, no, it's definitely. I mean, I can go so many places. I'm even thinking about your potential advice to people in like our generation now, when this is the kind of conversations that we're having and what we're thinking about. Maybe we'll go there actually then. Yeah. Well, how should, as much as there's influence that you can have on the political level, but then the decisions that people in our kind of age bracket, kind of at the time when you were, ultimately even stepping into your own career and things like that too, what are some of those things that we should be focusing on then, or the type of decision to be making right now?
I'd say focus on family, focus on children above everything else. I'd say don't wait till you've got a huge career going. Don't sacrifice for that. Have kids. Have a family.
What would you say is
Get married early. Don't wait till you're in your 30s. Get married in your... You, in case, not married?
Not married yet.
Hurry up!
Soon coming.
4 kids.
Angel investor.
4 kids.
You've got 4 kids.
No, I'm joking. My dad would beat me. I've got none.
Yeah, okay. So I think forget about huge success. Because the point of it is you don't have to live a materially affluent life to be happy. And it's not even a big thing. You can live in a fairly basic house. One of the best, most people I know is a guy called Will Rancy, who was in a previous church. And he had, and I knew one of his sons. I knew 2 of his sons, actually. And they were wonderful people. But they lived in this little house in Fairfield. It was like 3-bedroom, and his kids were piled, 6 children. They're all piled up in his rooms and stuff. Very, very basic. But really faithful man of God. And his children too. That to me is success. And this guy was basically a tram conductor. That was his job. And he was a church custodian in later life. So he never had any money, but he was a really successful man through his kids. I think we've got our values screwed wrong. And if one of my kids say to me, I want to become a carpenter, I'd say, good on you, that's great. I don't have to go to university. Just be a good good man.
Put it on the Jim's group, Jim's card.
What with your studies or your research on birth rates and stuff, what would you then say is like I wouldn't say optimal, the minimum amount of children somebody should be having?
That's a very interesting.
Well, if you're not married, you shouldn't have any, okay?
Right.
Because I think that children and marriage go together.
Yep.
I just think it's sad. I mean, look, some people can't have kids. That's
Yeah.
the thing you've got to recognise too. You people who desperately. I know a lady I work with very closely on this book, and she's a wonderful woman of God, wonderful mother. She would love to have more kids. She just finds it very difficult.
Yeah.
Okay, so you've got to recognise
Yeah,
that.
of course.
But I don't know. I mean, look, if you can, it's great to have at least 3 children.
Yeah.
I would have had more. I mean, crumbs if they just kept
Never
on
too
going.
late.
Well, not with my present wife.
True.
And I love her dearly, so that's not.
Might be too late.
But in that point of view, but we had them all. We tried pretty hard. It took us a few years to get him out. That's my 15-year-old son.
Yeah, wow.
Such a gorgeous kid. So
Yeah.
it's. I don't know. There's any number that's enough for me.
Yeah.
If I had my perfect life, I'd be having a kid every 2 years forever. That would be just great. Children are so much fun. People also, they have a wrong attitude towards being a parent. There's this hyper protectiveness thing they've got these days. That's so damaging.
Right.
You restrict kids inside. They've got to sit down and you put them on these wretched things, these devices, and they become so addicted, and they get into porn and social media and all kinds of dreadful stuff. What they really need to do is to get outside and play freely and play with their friends. They're actually a lot safer doing that, and they're building up strength and resilience. And you don't have to take them to every tutoring and every organisation. Let them be kids. Let them play. Let them roam. Let them learn with each other. And it's not actually, and then parenting becomes a much more joyful experience.
Yeah.
There's a wonderful book by Brian Kaplan called Selfish Reasons to Have More Kids, which talks about this sort of thing. Others do Family Unfriendly. There's so many great. Anybody wants to email me, Jim@jims.net. I'll give you my full book.
Recommendations, yeah.
All these wonderful books there are about how Angst Generation, Jonathan Haidt. That's a fantastic book about the dangers of all this kind of over protective, over focused on achievement. It's driving surge in youth suicide, mental health issues, depression, all kinds of issues, drug addiction. It's just unhealthy. You can really enjoy having kids. You set guidelines, you get them to do what they're supposed to do, but you let them run.
Yeah. With your research as well, I feel like this is a talking point that our generation gets. You hear it quite a bit as a reason as to why to not have too many kids. I don't believe in it at all, but I wanted to get, what's your opinion on like overpopulation of the earth?
We've really got a problem, haven't we? Population is shrinking in most countries. Even China's losing population. Japan's going down. South Korea's dropping like a stone. No, actually, I think that look, I could see the problem if the technology I'm talking about, which is basically epigenetic, took off. You could have an issue with too many people. You have to be careful what you do.
Right.
And I think to a certain extent, we're going to watch that, but it's just not in danger. The point of it is too, you look at a country like Australia, okay? We've got like 26 million people. Now you look at the potential for farming, for example. You could feed 1 billion people in this country.
Yeah.
I mean, we've got so much land that's just beautiful, fertile land, just grazing cattle and stuff, which is not a good use of land anyway. It's much better to grow food crops and so forth. But we could fit a lot more people into this country, and people are power, are wealth. The changes in medicine, in improvements in technology, in human life, things like better batteries, solar panels. That's all people. That's all people's technology. And I want us to go into space too. I love what Elon Musk says about finding another planet. Another world would be great to go. When I was younger, I always wanted to go to Alpha Centauri to set up a colony there or something. I mean, I have this. Part of us being human is to want to expand and to want to grow and to have goals and to want to achieve something.
Yeah, I've got a little bit of a nerd angle here. So I saw that you were
Speaking to a fellow nerd there.
yeah. I saw that you were looking into, or you're saying that some of the future, or maybe your future thoughts or future interests would be around CRISPR technology, which is kind of what you just touched on right now.
Yes, yeah.
CRISPR is like gene editing and all that. Well, more than that, but
Well, with us actually, what we use the word is not so much gene editing, but epigenetics.
yeah.
Could you explain the I'm probably
Okay.
not the smartest person.
Imagine a gene is a whole series of little taps spitting out a protein. That's basically what they do.
Okay.
It's a little tap, thousands, tens of thousands of little taps spitting out proteins. What epigenetics does is based of experience, life experience. It actually does things to turn those taps on or off. Like, for example, you put a thing called a methyl group and it says, stop that protein coming out.
Okay.
And different things like histones have the effect too. So what you're doing is the effect of the environment, your experiences, in actually turning on or off the activity of genes, which has a dramatic effect on character.
Okay, so you're manipulating the genes to behave optimally, essentially.
Well, not to, yeah, that's right. In a sense, they're either more or less active.
Yeah.
So, for example, if you have a adolescent period when you have less sexual activity, that actually does certain changes to the way that your genes function, which will help you to be more successful in later life. That's one thing the Kinsey report showed, actually. The levels of nocturnal emission is a very good indication of how successful somebody will, how much education they'll have.
That was a natural study done. Yeah.
Yeah.
They track things like, yeah.
Well, look, Kinsey was all in favour. He was a degenerate in the most
Yeah.
But his actual statistics are not at all favourable to his viewpoint if you look at them carefully.
Right.
So what you do in life, the way you behave, your attitude towards sexuality and pornography and drugs and alcohol and all the stuff that you can do or not do, fasting, prayer, church attendance, communion, all these things affect your genome. They actually turn on or off genes. And the younger it happens, the bigger the more permanent the effect it has. So what we're actually doing with this whole project is looking at ways to duplicate that, either by using drugs of some kind, which can affect temperament, or best of all, something like CRISPR, where you go in and you say, okay, what are the kind of character changes we want to have happen? And then we change them. And then you have somebody who's like a drug addict, for example. And one of the problems with drug addicts is they think very short term. I want this fixed now. I don't want it tomorrow. If you actually change their character in a way characteristic of what we're looking at, the food restriction thing, they actually start to think long term and think, well, I'm not going to do that because I know that I'll feel good now, but I'll feel terrible tomorrow and I'll have all these problems. No, I don't want to do that anymore. So you could actually change character. So it could be a way of solving that. And if you did this, you'd actually find people would become more hardworking, more responsible, more successful on the whole.
How are you navigating that space there? Because epigenetics especially is it's controversial. It's the ethics around it as well is tough ultimately as well. And you can almost you run the risk of certain labels that come with certain studies like that, especially historically looking at what epigenetics is, or some certain people who have had epigenetic.
Well, there's problems with this. One of the problems I get thrown at me is that I'm in favour of eugenics.
Yeah,
it's just because people are so scientifically ignorant. They don't understand the difference between epigenetics and eugenics. They're actually completely opposite. Eugenics says genes are what matter, and people are actually very uniform genetically, far more so than chimpanzees. So that's not the point. Epigenetics is environment affecting the way your genes function, and that's universal. It will apply the same to any people at all. So you do get people chucking at you. But look, CRISPR has got problems. One of the problems with CRISPR is you can, it's much more used for genetic changes. It can do things like split a particular point in the genome, or you can stitch things, and you can do all kinds of stuff. Epigenetics is a bit less advanced. The biggest problem is targeting.
Yeah.
Because if you
with
go in
epigenetics, you're saying?
with epigenetics, with CRISPR,
oh right, yeah,
you can make the gene target you want. So, but you go in and you target this. You say, okay, we want this change here. We want to have a methyl group there. We want a histone there, whatever. So you change that. But then, something happens over there and over there and over there.
You don't know the downstream effects.
And suddenly you get all kinds of weird changes happening which you don't want. So what they're actually doing is they're developing the targeting mechanisms. That's the crucial thing. You've got to be able to hit the right place and nothing else.
Yeah.
Now, technology is getting better. With my research head, who's a very experienced professor, he's got about like 200. He's a real academic whiz kid. Well, he's not a kid anymore. He's
whiz man.
He's whiz man. But he's very. He says within a year or two, CRISPR should be ready to target precisely, and that's really exciting. So in actual fact, the technology is advancing so fast that within a year or two, we should be able to make precise, specific changes. And because of our work with rats, actually, and rats and humans are pretty much the same at these things, we know pretty much which genes we've got to turn on or off.
Would you be confident being the test subject for this kind of stuff?
No.
Wait, yeah, no.
First of all, you
Okay.
do it in cells in culture, okay, which we're doing on a big scale. Then you do it with rats.
Yeah.
Then you test it with people.
Straight from rats to people, not another model organism in between, or
Rats and people are the same.
Yeah,
Honestly, when we're talking about things like the amygdala, the hippocampus, the hypothalamus, those kinds of organs. People and rats almost the same. Slightly different hormones, like they've got corticosteroid and we've got cortisol, but very, very similar. So if you test it on rats and it's good, then you go to people. But there's ways. What you would do is you'd test it in where there's an emergency case. So, you've got somebody who's a really bad drug addict, for example. Their life expectancy is probably about 5 years, if that. Okay, that's the kind of person you can say, okay, here's a treatment. It's untested, but we've done thousands of reps on rats and it looks pretty good. There's no ill effects. Would you be prepared to have a go at this? So you try it with people in a very bad situation and see what happens. Now, if they suddenly get better and become healthier and happier and get jobs and turn around and all the good things happen to them, people are going to look at it and, oh, wow, okay, I want some of that too. And I would take it very quickly because it would in effect be like the effect of a fast. And I don't know if you had this practice, but I'm a strong believer in fasting. But if you actually fast for 24 hours before going to church, your sense of God becomes much stronger. Have you ever experienced that?
I fasted, yeah, but so we do like a
Monday.
relationship, like fast, so we fast, and then we'll come together and pray, like.
Yeah,
But yeah, we definitely come together.
Your sense of spirituality becomes much stronger. God feels much closer. It's a very strong thing. I also found, for example, I used to become a lot more spiritual around the time my children were born for obvious reasons, because certain things you can't do. That's a natural.
You're locked in more. Okay, yeah.
Well,
mandatory fasting and abstinence.
Abstinence, no choice. There's no
Yeah.
legitimate outlet. I can tell you that. So you become more spiritual. It's very obvious. I know what it feels like, and when you're going to church. And you know what you experience, you have this spiritual high. I was like this on Sunday. I was my wife accused me of being a sook because I got tears coming down my face. And I'm sort of doing that, trying not to. She always pokes fun at me when I do this, but I get very emotional in church sometimes. That feeling is, even though it's embarrassing, it's a wonderful thing to feel so close to God, to feel so inspired, to feel so committed. That's the feeling that you should get from this. Now, if you're not a Christian, if you're not a believer, obviously it's not going to come across in the same way, but it would come across in the way that you'd have a sense of more purpose in the world. Your sense of purpose, your sense of discipline, your sense of wanting to do better things with your life. I'm going to make something of myself. I'm going to be a better husband or a better mother or a better whatever, better citizen. I'm going to volunteer. I'm just going to be a better person. That's what this should do to you.
That's very interesting.
And what you would get is a spiritual revival too. That was what happened. This decline of Christianity.
That was something that it's very exciting. Like you are, you hear preachers come, we're in the middle of a revival. I'm like, it doesn't feel like it just yet, but it is. It will be interesting to see what that definitely looks like from a point of view of like there's generally so many different lives being impacted and it's knock-on domino effect from it. I was going to speak to being a father, selfish reasons of eventually getting there myself or ourselves. But how, and you mentioned around, especially the book Anxious Generation as well, how much are you directly trying to instill these principles that you've, built your life upon into the life of your children as well? Or even, because I know you've got a lot older children now as well. So at the time of during very formative years of adolescence, what was your approach to that, and how important is it for you to then also see them once you're gone to represent everything you stood for? Because it's very true that we have a very limited amount of control over what happens once we're gone, but it's on our mind in terms of, I just hope it all goes well. So how did you approach that, I guess, as a father?
I'm not very good at it.
Right.
To be quite honest. Out of my 10 children, only 2 would be Christians. That's not a very good record for somebody who believes as I do. But I mean, my divorce messed things around. My first 5 children went elsewhere. My younger ones are more positive. I pray for them. I talk to them. I influence them subtly still. I see them, most of my kids, pretty regularly. So all you can try and be as an influence. It's very hard in the modern world. Honestly, it is. I so much admire people who are so good at what they... carrying across the generations. My the senior pastor of our church, Dale Stevenson, one of his son Ben was actually giving a sermon on Sunday, and he was just a magnificent young man. He was just so powerful, so convincing, and talking about playing the field. He was talking about family actually, and how you create that and how you bring that across. And his daughter, she's wonderful too. So she's got, I think all his kids are Christians, but he's just, people are successful at that. I admire and I envy, and I don't have that. I haven't been as successful. I honestly haven't.
You say in the modern world, what do you think some of those challenges are that make that a little bit more difficult then?
Well, because the stress of society is so strong. Kids are very susceptible to peer group pressure and so forth, and everybody around you saying, "Hey, don't be silly. Of course you shouldn't wait to get married, and whatever. The value society are very corrupt, and that's very, very hard for a parent to resist. The people that are successful are those like the Amish and Orthodox Jews, for example, who insulate their children to a certain from the society. And one of the ways to do that is by having a different language, like they speak what I call it Pennsylvania Dutch or Yiddish. So there's a different language, and the culture is very separate. They have to resist this siren call of this very. It's a nasty culture. It doesn't create people happiness, but it's very addictive. This culture that is, hey, all you need to do is to do whatever you feel like. You don't have to be concerned about controlling your desire. Just do whatever you want, and everybody around you, oh, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Yeah, you're such a great person because you're doing what you want. You're coming out as a lesbian, or you're doing all the proper things that we think is good. That's a very hard thing to resist. And in
terms of the liberation, are you saying?
Yeah, it's addictive. It really is. And even drug addicts have the same kind. They have a community. When people talk about drug addiction as being to do with the physical addiction, but interesting thing is in Vietnam, when soldiers most of the soldiers got addicted to heroin over there, and they were really concerned when they came back that there would be mass heroin epidemics. But in fact, 90% of them plus just coming on like that. As soon as they got out of that social environment to one which was different, they dropped it. So even things like drug addiction are social. If people are around you saying, yes, you should do this, this is good, you'll be part of it, you'll be friends, and that sense of community they miss. Because we're all people of community, we listen to those around us.
Do you not think though, like, for example, take the Amish or groups like that, there is the flip side of there is a lot of control, that there's no opportunity to be the individual that you would like to be if you're part of that group?
Yeah. Well, in a sense, yes, exactly. That's the whole point. That you're actually the kind of person that God wants you to be, not what you myself like to be. I might like to come out as whatever peculiar, whatever I have. I might like to have affairs, for example. I might like to come out as a gay. I might like to try drugs and stuff like that. That's not what I do with any of these. But I'm just giving an example. These are things that I, as an individual, might want to do, but God doesn't want me to do them. And in fact, God knows what's good for me, that I don't do what I feel like. It's what Paul talks about, the struggle between the flesh and the spirit. And he even talks about himself. He says, there's things that I need to do that I don't do, and there's things that I don't do.
That I do.
Yeah, quotation. This is one of the greatest evangelists of all time, and he struggled with this himself, to do the will of God, and he struggled like mad against things that he found tempting. And we all have that issue. The question is, do we follow our own selfish desires, do what we feel like doing in the media, or do we listen to what God wants us to do?
I think I hear that in the sense of what you're saying around the communities fostering that, those type of communities fostering you doing what they believe like God wants you to do. But then you don't end up with like the Jims of the world who have been able to take that into everywhere else though. Because they're quite insulated, isolated communities. Yeah. You don't end up with people like your influence though. So what do we, there needs to be, I guess, a balance between that.
But that's very hard too. One of the problems too, look at the evangelicals, okay, which I guess you presumably are in the same kind of position as me. I'm a Baptist, okay. We call it a Baptist-Costal church, which is kind of very enthusiastic Baptist. Sometimes waving their hands in the air.
Someone might do a little quick.
That kind of stuff, yeah. So which I've done actually, speaking in tongues in the past, not recently. But the point of it is, you have, unfortunately what happens is when we reach out to the world, we become influenced by them too. And a lot of evangelical Christianity is fairly weak in terms of it's compromised a great deal with what goes on. And I give examples. I have enormous sympathy with somebody who's same-sex attracted, and I can understand how feeling love in that environment is a good thing. But the fact of the matter is, it's not the law. It's not God's law. It's not allowed for in the Bible. And I don't condemn it. If any of my kids were like that, I wouldn't turn my back on them, and I'd love them all the same. They're not actually, but the point of it is, and I don't even necessarily have a problem with gay marriage, you put it that way too, if people are in that frame of mind. But at the same time, God's law is that you don't do such things. And that's pretty clear, Old Testament and New Testament. And you don't have sex outside marriage. You don't have sex before marriage. You don't have sex with somebody else when you're married to somebody else. You have one partner, that's it. These are fairly strict, clear guidelines. And to the extent that we compromise with the values of the world to make ourselves more acceptable to the wider community, then we lose some of the power of faith. And what you find very powerfully so is that the religious groups that are most resistant are the ones that grow, or that at least hold the line, and the ones that are most rushing to fit with the world, like the Uniting Church, for example, and those kinds of churches, they're going down like a rock because they're not different enough. So there's that tension, isn't there?
It's big.
And see, the Mormons do it very well, because what they do is a system which is very, very separate and distinct. And they have a much higher birth rate and have very high levels of commitment. But they send the kids out, these young men and often women too, for 2 years. And in a very strict, disciplined way, they go and they evangelize. So they do it that way, but they don't become part of those communities. It's a very tough thing they do. But they come back and they have this tremendous drive and faith, and they tend to be very successful. They get married very young and stuff, but they're very confirmed in it. So how do you influence the world without accepting the world's values?
I'm even wondering as well, I think something that's difficult in our generation is just trying to also, I guess, identify what are the correct identifiers of faithfulness too. Because I think I try to see I look at people our age, I'm like, okay, yeah, sure, looks like definitely, yeah, good marriage, good relationship, things like that, which are typically good indicators of things are going well or tracking well. But do they treat people? Do they have kindness in their hearts and things like that? Like, how do we also then still instill those things and balance that? Because I think it's quite hard though to try to have the narrative like that set apart, and then still try to have that compassion and love for people without the intersections of those. I guess those, and I think that's interesting that you mentioned that they actually send people out for 2 years or something to, I guess, try to develop and foster that. But it will be very hard to have, I guess, love for people or something like that with a constant set apart mentality. But yeah, there's clearly a tension.
Our culture is so corrosive. It's very, very difficult. And the more you adapt to it, the more you become part of it, the less successful you'll be at having something distinct. But we've lost so much of what traditional Christianity was about. For example, even something like the Lenten fast, which was never particularly severe, nothing like what the Muslims do. No food or drink, sunrise to sunset, which in certain periods can be longer.
Yeah.
That's now the Lenten fast was like the period before Easter. You weren't supposed to have meat, you weren't supposed to have sugar. Okay, so it's quite a mild fast by comparison. You could have fish, or the traditional no meat on Friday, the fish thing that Catholics used to do for a long time. Now, even quite mild things like that we don't do anymore. So evangelical Christianity has been stripped down a great deal, and I think lost a lot of what's powerful in the biblical Christianity.
So you're almost like because I think the whole thing with evangelical Christianity is kind of this whole thing of, it's not a religion, it's a relationship, right? But you're kind of saying like there is a lot of merit to the religious activities and behaviors almost. It's like bring them back in a sense.
It's fulfillment of the
because
law.
if you act in the relationship doesn't arise in a vacuum. It arises from a way of life, from a community, from a certain kinds of practices. I mean, you might want to be close to God, but if you're going around having affairs and so forth, you are not going to be, or indulging in porn or taking drugs or whatever you're doing, even secretly, your relationship is going to suffer. It's just the nature of us. We cannot be in communion with God when we're living a life that is out of communion with God. And Paul talks about this in Corinthians, in a number of different letters. He talks about, well, you used to be like this, but not anymore. So yes, salvation by faith, of course, but at the same time, you do need to change the way you live. Otherwise, your faith will suffer.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I was even in line with this, right? Because a lot of people will hear this and you speak to these values as truth, right? And this is a quote from one of the books you actually recommended, The Righteous Mind, Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion,
Yes.
by Jonathan Haidt, right? And one of the quotes in there was, anyone who values truth should stop worshipping reason. So how then, because speaking to these things as truth, people will then come and give you, no, but this is the rationale for this, or this doesn't make sense. How can you then this? How can you then that? It tends to looking like delusion sometimes when it comes to the truth principle. So how do you speak to that?
Reason is a very poor guide to behavior. Now, there's a wonderful book, and I know there's a book called The Secrets of Our Success, which is about the evolution of us as humans, what makes us special. And what he points out is that the reason we're so successful is that we have this cultural technologies which enable us that to do certain things. Like, for example, if you want to eat in a tropical forest, there are certain foods that you can have, certain others you can't. But the foods that you can have to be prepared in a very special way with a whole series of steps. And the same thing living in that frozen Arctic, the same thing growing food, the same thing industrial. They're all technologies. The point of it is you have to learn the entire technology because you don't know which parts of it work. So as an example, you've got the explorers Burke and Wills. They went on an expedition up to the Gulf of Carpentaria and they came back. They ran out of food. Okay. Now, the Aboriginals were around them and they knew who they were and they knew how to live. From their point of view, these guys were dying in the midst of a larder because they know which foods you can use, which ones have bad effects, how you need to prepare. They knew all this stuff. And the problem they had was Burke, in particular, has a very bad temper. He even fired his gun at somebody's head. He didn't listen to them. He was too arrogant. He said, I'm a white man. I'm so superior. He didn't listen to them. He and Wells starved to death, basically, in the middle of a larder. Whereas King, the only survivor of the party, actually listened to the Aboriginals and did what they wanted because they understood it. So that arrogance to say, my own reason, that's what Burke thought. My own reason is good enough for me to say, hey, these ignorant savages, they don't know. But they knew how to live in that environment. Christianity, religions are technologies, they're cultural technologies that have proved their ability to succeed for thousands of years. They're the advanced process of things that have been tried, and the ones that didn't work so well, they died. There's been a lot of heretical Christian sects, the Brethren of the Free Spirit, which basically said just to be one with God, you need to go out and do sex with anybody and sin, and then you'll be. They had lots of weird things, and they died. They were either crushed or they died out. They had bad effects. The religions that we have today, and including not only Christianity but also Islam, Buddhism, those kinds of things, where they're cultural technologies, you can't rationally look at them and say, this is, I'll take that aspect but not aspect, because then it's like
The whole system works
yeah,
together.
it's like going to the Aboriginals and saying, okay, well, I'll eat this food, but I won't listen to your advice on how to prepare it. Because if you do that, you'll die because you don't know the full, even though reason might say, hey, just eat it.
Yeah.
The cultural technology of the Aboriginals has said, no, you prepare it this way, and you do that, then you do this. Yeah, that's not reasonable. I'll just do it my way. And it killed them. And with the same religion, it's exactly the same thing. It's a system. It's an entire system. And when you start discarding that, you get into really big messes. And what you do is you get rid of Christianity and say, oh, Marx, he's so reasonable. Let's go with Marx. Look at the effect of Marxism. It's been horrific.
Yeah.
Tens of millions of people died.
Yeah.
It's just shocking what they did. And now it's had such an effect in China that it's destroyed their traditional culture completely. And they are really, really in trouble. The actual fact they're in worse trouble than the people of the diaspora, people like Taiwan and Southeast Asia. The Chinese, they were doing better. They have better character than the young people in China because they destroyed this original culture through the reason. It's scientific. No, it's not. And when you have the philosophers and so forth, but look at the Greeks of the Golden Age, for example, people like Plato and Socrates and so forth. They were questioning traditional values, but in fact, what happened as a result of that is that they questioned so many values on the basis of reason that what you get in the following century, in the 4th century, the population of Greece, which had been growing in the past and incredibly vigorous and creative, it started to decline and they became decadent. They used reason to attack traditions of the past. And the Greek traditions weren't anything like as powerful or effective as ours, but there was still something there. There were still things about respect for parents and the gods and so forth, and certain rituals they did. And they reasoned their way out of them. And once they got rid of that stuff, the whole society just collapsed. And then Greece fell. So 320, Alexander comes in, just takes over the whole thing.
Yeah.
You know, like in the Persian Wars, 150 years earlier, the Persians come with this vast empire, and the Greeks get together and they fight them and they beat them. And then 100 years later, this little kingdom in the north, semi-barbarian kingdom, comes down and they just basically collapse with a whimper. Why? Because their whole culture had been destroyed. Reason is not a guide to living. Tradition, God's word is the guide to living as a Christian, or even the traditions that have been developed by for thousands of years.
I think this speaks back to what you were talking about before around individualism and I guess the dangers of it. In the sense that, I was saying it to one of my friends recently. I think one of the problems is we develop our own sense of gospel. You can take that from specifically when it comes to faith and how the Bible speaks to it. Men will have itching ears in the latter days. So in terms of you gravitate towards certain teachings or whatever serves you. But it definitely comes back to that because a lot of us, I guess, in our generation, and typically this might happen at this stage in life, that you just think you know best.
You do.
And it would be quite illogical to live life without looking at how life has been lived previously, and at least coming to some kind of an understanding from that. You don't have to take everything as gospel in terms of how other people live their life or what religion teaches and things like that. But there is, I guess, a bit of merit behind understanding the context with which we live in, because we're only here because of decisions of other people as well too. So there is, there's definitely. It's
kind of obnoxious to go I'll figure
this out
after everyone else that's already lived.
That's what we do. I mean, it's part of the genius of the modern age in a way. I mean, we are so unhinged from the past that we can go out and do amazing things, like in terms of science and technology and business and all kinds of great innovations. We're an immensely creative people, artistically in so many ways. We are. And yet society is falling apart around us. Why? Because we're getting rid of some of the outdated ideas, but we're also getting rid of very fundamental ideas that are the foundation of our society. And that foundation is crumbling and the whole thing's magnificent structures going down. And the thing is that Western culture has such incredible prestige right now because of our wealth and because of our technology that everybody in the world wants it. But they're making a terrible mistake. And you look at people of the Taliban in Afghanistan, for example. Now, they fought for 20 years. Why were they fighting so bitterly against things that were so obviously good? I mean, we can't understand it. We want to educate women. We want proper scientific control of this and that, and we want proper, Enlightenment ideas and modern Western ideas and stuff. And these people fought bitterly for 20 years at an immense cost to drive that out because they don't want that, because it destroys their culture and their way of life.
That's an interesting argument. That's a tough argument.
But what do you think they felt about it?
Where did
what
they
was
come
their
from?
attitude? Is I'm an evil person because because I don't want my wife? No, because this is the way God told me to live.
That's interesting. That's a tough one, I'm thinking. Especially in that context there, with what comes from it in terms of their outworkings and how they, I guess, go about.
It does seem so right to us to do these things. And from our point of view, it is. And I can feel the same hurt that people feel that women aren't allowed to study and they're allowed to be teachers and lawyers and doctors and all the rest of it. Yes, you can feel that at the same time. And I'm not having the utmost sympathy for what they go through. But at the same time, we're trying to transmit to them this incredibly corrupt, decadent culture, and in effect, they're saying we don't want it.
I think one thing, I hear what Daniel's saying. It's a tough thing to argue for, but I do as a Iraqi, it's what the whole war was. We're gonna come bring you guys democracy, and they were like, we don't really want that version of democracy, right? So I do understand a society of people going, we don't want what you think works for you.
No.
Because we have what works for us. I can also see what you're saying there. Yeah.
The problem with Iraq too is the situation in the view of Westerners and people like George W. Bush, and we went in there. I was furious when they happened. I had a huge argument with my eldest son about that. I said, "This is stupid. This war will not work." You've got people that are psychologically adjusted to a certain kind of government, which is fairly brutal. if you get rid of it, you don't get a peaceful democratic society because it's not suited to them. What you're likely to get is either a renewed, really harsh dictatorship, or you're going to get chaos. Well, you've got both.
Literally.
It just was the amount of suffering that the whole thing caused was just beyond, because we said we're going to impose our values, our cultures, our institutions on you. See, when you talk about Afghanistan again, you've got a situation where, we obviously know that Western cultures and Western courts and justice are obviously superior. But it's not really the case there, because one of the problems they had is that the courts were incredibly slow, and they were also very corrupt. So people who were wealthy could get away with it. One of the reasons that common people often support the Taliban is because the Taliban commander would come in, they bring the forward and the judge, and they said, no, you're right, he's wrong, give him a pig or goat or whatever, okay? They had swift justice, which didn't really have the same. Now, it might be driven by things like clan alignments and stuff, but our institutions just don't work there.
Yeah, the system, there needs to be that, I guess, the nuance in how the system operates in a different context. Can it even, should it be invented a different way? There's definitely, I guess, we can't say that we live in a society or world where you can't take things from other places.
Look what happens in Lebanon right now. This is the most democratic country in the Middle East, and it's just an absolute chaos. The whole place is falling apart. It's just absolute shambles. And then you look at what Western governments have done, for example, in Syria or Libya, where you go in and here's this evil dictator in Libya. Oh, we'll get rid of him. We'll bomb him down and get him all killed. Oh, fantastic, aren't we good? You've still got civil war going on there. People are starving. People are dying. You try and impose the Western values and institutions on people that aren't suited to them. You do not get a peaceful democratic state.
Yeah, no, it's the tension in just navigating this world is so, and it's funny because I think we have no one else to blame but ourselves in terms of the type of decisions that have been made over these times. And I mean, would you call yourself an anthropologist ultimately as well, anyway, or?
I don't want to call myself
just Jim. But as someone
I call myself a scientist.
Yes.
Because one of the things that we do actually all the time is we take hypotheses from my work and we say, okay, we're going to try them with rats in the lab, and these are what I expect to have happen. Now, if it happens, that confirms the theory. If it doesn't, it doesn't. So, for example, we're looking at the effects of cortisol, and we're trying to look at cortisol infusions of rats at different ages. They should increase the level of aggression. Well, they don't. Okay, so it's not wrong with my theory. You test things out. So ultimately, that's what scientific method is. You have a hypothesis, you develop a testable hypothesis, you have a theory, develop a testable hypothesis, you test it, and you adjust your theory. That is the way I look at history, ultimately, which you can actually test in a laboratory. See, one of the things, for example, that I predicted was that if you take rats and you give the bedding, who are food restricted, and you give the bedding to other rats, you'll get them to act as if they're food restricted to a certain extent, which you do. And the guy who was running this for me was amazed. He couldn't believe it. And I said, that's my theory. That's what it says should happen. And then we try to work out what pheromones were involved.
Yeah, I was going to say, is it through the release of probably pheromones?
Must be pheromones, yeah. And we're doing something with people too, actually. One of the things we're doing at the moment, we're just about to start, is an experiment where we're actually getting people who are food restricted to wear pads under their arms and stuff, and expose people to the odors and see whether they can act as if they're food restricted, which my theory suggests they should be to some extent. So pheromones should have this effect. These are testable hypotheses. So in that sense, I'm a scientist. Yes.
Yeah. I was going to say, in saying that, then, when you look at the future and just the way we, continue to trajectory as people, what are the things that excite you? But then also, what are some of the fears you have in the way we're moving, aside from birth rate? Because I know that's a main one.
Well, we're going downhill very fast. It's not obvious. It should be. The other thing people are puzzled about is why isn't productivity rising faster? Well, it's quite obvious, because character is decaying. Character is becoming, we're developing all these great new technologies, but against that is the declining character. People are just not as hardworking, as disciplined as they used to be. It's very hard. You can just see it so clearly. There was a guy I knew who was in charge of this is many years ago, Blundstones. They had a plant in Tasmania. And they've been making these iconic Australian boots for generations. And they moved to Thailand. And I said, why? And he said, well, it's not really the cost of Thai labor. I just cannot get the kind of really good, reliable, disciplined workers that we used to get. We're just not as good at doing those things. Or why did the Japanese succeed so well back in the 80s when they were building cars, the best cars in the world? And the individual people on the on the assembly lines would actually look at problems, and that's a character thing. That's why they were good. It wasn't because they had some wonderful system of business, but because they had incredible workers who were very focused on improving what they did. And when you lose that character, economy is going to go down. We're actually heading into very dangerous waters. However, that's the danger. The potential is if we understand what's going on and we can reverse it, which I'm very confident that we can, then you actually have a world which will be incredibly better. For example, end of miserable poverty. There's no reason why anybody should be poor, because genetically speaking, we're all very similar. If we had the character, if people could have the character they wanted to be enterprising and disciplined and so forth, then you wouldn't have poverty anymore. You'd be having an end of things like drug addiction and stuff. There's no problems, but nothing like what we've got now. And you'd have a much stronger, more cohesive, more peaceful world if you did it correctly. So the potential is extraordinary.
Yeah.
Because I wrote this question down a bit back. It was I've got it here. Is our generation too fixated on wealth creation? Also, like our generation being, I guess, younger people, but because I think there's been a gap between seeing a lot of generational wealth and then now at a time when there's post-pandemic kind of things and now crises, health issues, cost of living. There's now, it seems like a leaps and bounds to get to anywhere ultimately, right? So are we too fixated on wealth creation? Is it our fault? Or what else are we actually meant to be focused on at the moment then?
We are far too fixated on wealth. We started too fixated on individual status. What we should be focusing on is doing the will of God, of living better lives, of being better people, of being better members of our community.
How does that pay someone's bills? That's the question I'm just saying that people might have.
And you don't have such high bills.
You don't have such high bills, did you say? Oh, because you're not fit. Okay, right. I see what you're saying.
Because you're not after. If you take away the need for prestige, it's actually possible to live quite economically. It's because we spend so much on things that we don't necessarily need. Look, when I was a student, I was living on nothing. I was just very, very, very scrupulous about not spending any money on anything. I lived okay. I didn't want to have to do too much work, but my gardening job was quite good enough for that, just part-time, and that supported me. I didn't need much because I didn't live on very much. If your material needs are very low, like food, if you live on basic food like vegetables and so forth, and you can eat very healthy and well, and it costs you very, very little, and you can even do your own gardening. You know, I actually got my gardens that I do. I get a lot of potatoes and pumpkins and all kinds of things. Eat a lot of that kind of food. You can live on very little. And you can just live very simply, and you can have an old car instead of a new one.
I guess
Sounds very tiring though.
Yeah, that's not
living that type of living on little and living on the basics. It sounds tiring. It sounds like you have to put more effort into doing that rather than
But listen, let me tell you something. You know, one of the greatest things to do with happiness is exercise, effort. Well, why shouldn't you go and do some gardening? Dig up your backyard. Don't worry about the lawns. Jim's mowing can
cost much.
go away, Jim's mowing. Dig up your backyard and start planting vegetables and stuff, and go out there and be healthy and be outdoors. You'll have to be a lot happier if you do that. Just simple life. Like if you can ride a bike instead of a car. Can you get around without doing some of the things? So what if we do for children too is grossly excessive. You know, they have to have the latest electronic gadgets. Why? Because everybody else has got them. That's not a good reason. It's actually very destructive. It's like English generation. They can be very, very negative. We have kids that we're so concerned they be successful. You've got to take them to tutoring, and you've got to do this and you've got to do that. Actually, in fact, psychologically speaking, you're better off saying, get outside and play. And not do any of that, because they learn more mental health. They learn resilience by actually playing with other kids freely, much more than going to endless lessons and stuff. They become stronger and happier and healthier. So many things we spend money on are actually really negative. It's difficult because not so much because we need this stuff, but because other people have it. And that's the problem of being part of a community where your kids go to school and the other kids have got all the latest technology and they've got the latest clothes and they've got all this sort of, it's all garbage basically. It's not helpful. It doesn't create, but the peer group pressure becomes so extreme, and that's why people like the Amish do so well, because they cut themselves off. You cannot have mains electricity. You can't have makeup. You can't have jewelry. You can't own a car. you cut yourself off. You speak a different language, and they make a very precise distinction. So they have this time when they get to the age of 16, where the kids are actually allowed a certain amount of freedom, and they can do certain things. They still live at home, but they can do certain things they couldn't do. And then they're going to make a decision: are they going to join the community, become baptized? Now, if they choose to do that, they don't get cut off from their family. They can still have a connection, but they're not going to be most of the community. But if they decide, which 85% of them do, I will be baptized, then you have to live the life. And if you do, at that stage, you'll get shunned if you break that. So that's that discipline that they've got. And because the kids are going to a school with other kids who don't have advanced technology and so forth, there's not the problems.
Now, being in a society like we are on this side of the world,
Very hard.
I was going to say, yeah, considering this is our life now, this is what we know, how it'll be hard to just make that.
I'm not gonna lie,
Switch.
everything about the Amish lifestyle turns me off, aside from the community aspect. Community is great, I think, whatnot, but I think everything about that lifestyle turns me off, just because I think whether it's Christianity, whether it's Islam, whether it's the Amish, whether it's whatever, you can live these noble looking lifestyles, but I think human condition is human condition, and you will find perversion is rife throughout them. There's a lack of accountability because there's this perception of policing within our own community and the self-righteousness that comes from it. So I think, I don't know, like, I think you're allowed to, you can't have phones, you can't have this, you can't have this, you can't have whatever, but you also can't have an opinion when you're in that kind of community.
No, you can't. And that's the point. And it is a life that I wouldn't live either.
Yeah.
I love my books. I love electronics. I love talking books. I love all that kind of stuff. And I wouldn't do that. I enjoy what I do in business. I couldn't do that if I was Amish.
Yeah.
I wouldn't dream of joining an Amish community. But let me tell you something. By every measure of mental health and well-being, they are streets ahead of the rest of the community. They are happier. There's less suicide. There's less breakdowns. They have no problems at all. But by every conceivable measure, they are better off.
So you're ultimately saying, we're here, figure out how to take some of these things and implement it into your.
The best way to do it, if you want to be separate, is to try and have some sort of a sense of a separatist community.
Right.
Like my son, my oldest son, who's a very strong Christian, and his wife, they're living in New York until just recently. They were part of a church community. The pastor had 6 kids, and that was very common in that congregation. Even though they lived within walking distance of Central Park, you wouldn't believe it. But there was a church that he found that had very strong values, and that's their community, that's their life. So the other kids were living in a similar way. I'm not saying they didn't have electronics, but but the best way to
run by electronics
is to somehow cut yourself off. Mormons do this to some extent too, and they have the same kinds of values, but not nearly as extreme as the others. That your church community is so intense that you tend to relate to community rather than to the wider world. And that sense of separateness about it. You can't. Yes, if you want to be part of the world, you really. It's very hard. It's very addictive, this culture. Is this wealthy, individualistic, have your own opinion, do your own things. And even as Christians, evangelical Christians, we are drawn to that. We cannot help being affected by it.
Are there any, back to obviously like your Christianity, and obviously there's the science, there's the Bible element, you believe in both. Are there any beliefs that you hold that either contradict science from your biblical beliefs or your scientific beliefs that contradict what the mainstream beliefs are around the Bible?
Well, I'm an evolutionist, as you probably gathered, so I don't accept the Adam and Eve story, and certainly Noah's Ark is impossible in about 100 different reasons, okay? But the way I look at it, those kinds of stories is you've got to understand the viewpoint of the people who wrote it down. What were they trying to say? You can never understand any written text without understanding the viewpoint of the person who was responsible for it, because it's written down, centuries, 1,000 years after they were happened. And if you look at the Christian belief, the Jewish idea about creation, it is very related to other things that were happening in Mesopotamia, which is that was the area of civilization they were in. Very similar. The idea of the flood in Noah's Ark, the flood in Gilgamesh.
Every major story around the world has a flood.
Okay. So the point of it is, though, what were the writers trying to say? Now, if you look at the accounts of the gods in Mesopotamian creation myths, people like Gilgamesh and so forth, what you see is that gods are part of the world. There's a whole series of gods and they're part of it. They grow out of the world. If you look at Genesis, what you see is a God who is there before the world, outside the world. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void. Now, the literal meaning happening 6,500 years, I don't think it actually happened, but I don't think it mattered. And if you look at Genesis 1, Genesis 2, the actual accounts of how creatures were made were different. In one, animals come first, the other people come first. If you look at it, they're not scientifically exactly the same, but both of them made the same point. God is the creator. There is one God, one and only, not part of the universe, not one multitude of God, but God, separate, distinct, powerful. Do what he says. That's the lesson. That's what Genesis is trying to say. And the same thing with the story of Noah, the story about a righteous man and obeying the will of God, and the fact that not obeying the will of God gets you into trouble. That's the story. That's what they meant by it. That's what the lesson they were trying to achieve. They weren't trying to write a scientific account. It's ludicrous to think that they were. They were trying to write a story about who God is and what he wants us to do and how he wants us to live. And given that sense, I believe that the Bible is absolutely the Word of God.
Yeah, I think you have to as well, ultimately, right?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, I was going to say that how do you now make sure that doesn't then discount the scientific accounts of other stories then as well, in terms of
which other stories?
I mean, yeah, I'm sure there's a lot that already historically we've got the evidence to back them, but I'm not sure which ones don't have, I guess, maybe some kind of historic evidence to show like this. Let me throw one.
You have to give me
I think
I
often,
have to think of it.
I think often we have the historical context where it's like you could probably read names down and all that kind of stuff.
I'll say like Job,
But-
or something then.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, I don't.
Or like an S.
No, I don't. I mean, Joe may have been based on somebody, but I doubt it literally happened that way. I mean, just the numbers are too, the sevens and everything else. I mean, it's a story. It's a story with a very powerful point to it, probably based on things that have happened to somebody, but still, literally speaking, no, I don't think exactly there's anybody like that. But the story of Job is a guide to God. But look at things like look at the New Testament. Look at the genealogy of Jesus. It's quite different. There's two genealogies, one in Matthew, one in Luke, and they're quite different and distinct. Now, how you get that, I don't know. But the point of it, the writers were trying to say is that Jesus was a descendant of David. That's what that matters to them. The genealogy.
I guess also the emphasis they were placing in terms of Jewish emphasis in, I think it might have been maybe.
Yeah,
and
one of them went through
Matthew,
a
one
lot of
big-
kings, others
kings.
didn't, and so
Yeah.
forth. The point of it is you still got to understand it in terms of what they were trying to say at that time, what it meant. And they were trying to create a theological point, a point that had sense in terms of who God was, who Jesus was, what his role was, and they put things in place. It's like the way they ascribed authorship to, we look upon the author of a book as, but you can't just take the author off a book and put somebody else's name on it. That's fraudulent. You don't do that. But that's not how they thought about it. They would actually have a book they would dedicate to a particular person. They'd say, this is the gospel according to Matthew. Well, it almost certainly wasn't Matthew at all who wrote it, and it wasn't the Matthew of the disciples. It's too late apart from anything else. But they put his name on it. That's their way of attributing things. That's just how they thought about things. They don't have the same attitudes towards science and literature that we do, and it's arrogant to think they should have.
I agree with definitely the should have part. Yeah, like.
So are we saying, because I know this has been a conversation for a long time, that you can't be fully science and fully Bible. So are you saying that you can be?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. I don't see any contradiction at all.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, properly understood, the Bible is a far better guide to a good way to live than any science. Though the more we learn about science, the more we understand that.
Yeah, I hear that a lot from a lot of theologians and things as well.
Yeah.
They've taken their time to study into
Yeah,
science.
study it.
Even things like the Jewish law, for example. Okay, well, what's the point of it? I mean, there is a point to it, because what Jewish law does is micromanage behavior in a certain way that creates a certain kind of character, which has made Jews phenomenally successful. So the point was there. The Jewish law was there for a purpose and a reason, and it still serves that function in modern Judaism. Different for us. We have a different kind of culture, and God's called us to live in a different way, and that's fine. That's different. But it's not that there wasn't anything wrong about it in the first place.
Yeah, it speaks to, I guess, that whole being set apart,
Yeah.
which is ultimately what it was, I guess. I'm conscious of the potential
Yeah.
time. I know that you're nearby, so yeah, it's a nice stone
It
skip.
doesn't worry me. You can edit this all you like.
Stone skip route.
It always happens for me. I'm afraid to say when I get into things, people say, "Oh, I'll give you half an hour," and then an hour and a half later they're still talking. So,
Yeah. Well, we're fine. We love a good,
Yeah.
we
We're
love
happy
a
with
good
that.
rabbit hole, but
Yeah.
just to be contribute, I guess even people would be definitely very interested in the business side of things and how you've just navigated that. So we did get some questions, I think, and
Even
some.
before that, I wanted to touch on the whole COVID.
Oh, Jim's
Yeah,
line.
yeah. Jim Slang calling yourself king during that time. What was your thoughts? Like, what were you kind of thinking? What was your stance?
during COVID,
Yeah, and how you were. I
well,
think,
the Premier shut down my franchisees and I got pretty upset about it. What else can you say?
Yeah,
It had no point to it.
yeah.
There was no medical reason for it. The guidelines from Health and Human Services came out at the weekend,
Mhm.
and they said very sensibly, 4 pages long, very sensibly, sole operators working by themselves doing trade jobs can operate. Obviously, based on health advice, there was no danger because you don't have to contact with someone when you're mowing your
Yeah.
lawn. You don't have to
Of course.
you don't have to meet them. You don't have to see them.
Yeah.
You can get paid electronically. No danger to health. Clearly, the Premier gets up at a press conference the following Wednesday and says you can't have your lawns mowed and your houses cleaned. Notably, he doesn't say you can't go out and mow lawns and clean houses because he's not concerned with the plebs because they're mere peasants and below his contempt. I'm considering my affluent inner suburban supporters, the people who get work done. That's the people I'm talking to. The rest couldn't give a stuff. And he gets up and says, you can't. Okay, so he shuts down 100,000 plus people. There was never any reason. We took him to court and we said, what was your reason for doing this? Because you took away people's livelihood for no reason. And they said, we don't have to tell you. And the court agreed with them. There's no reason. You can take people's livelihood away, even though the law says you can't, without reason. He had no reason. He thought it was politically expedient. And I got very upset and I made a big fuss about it. I mean, that's all.
Yeah.
What can you say?
He sucks.
Are you still fighting? I don't know. It's probably legal and stuff like that. But are you still pursuing that to this day?
No, I can't. We appealed it and we did it and we lost it. And the courts just basically backed the Premier.
Yeah.
Because the law of the land says, this is the 2008 Act, you cannot remove a person's livelihood without good reason. And we went to court and they said, what was the reason? And he said, okay, we don't have to tell you. So you cannot remove a person's livelihood without good reason. But the reason is whatever the government thinks it is and don't have to explain it.
Yeah.
That's the addenda.
In other words,
You missed out.
a good reason is, I don't want you to work.
You got to read the footnotes. So
So in other words, we can't take your livelihood away from you unless I want to take your livelihood away from you.
Right.
If I do, then there's nothing you can do about it.
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I think during that time there
Yeah,
was
it's tough,
just a lot was passing just because of what was happening in the context of the situation. So a lot of people didn't question it, so they got away with so much, which is in hindsight,
Well, it was-
looking back now.
Looking back now, it's probably I've been fairly much exonerated, I suppose you might say. At the time, though, I got in a lot of trouble. 2 of my daughters wouldn't speak to me for months.
Wow.
One for more than a year, actually. They were so angry about what I'd done because I was perceived as fighting against this wonderful man, this great Premier.
We ran away from us anyway afterwards. So.
But it was interesting. With time, it shifted in our direction. Even the police were police were wonderful. Actually, I
Right.
really admired Victoria Police. They knew quite well how garbage this whole thing was. They were great.
Nah.
We did
But
get
to
a
the people?
couple questions from our listeners, all different sorts. One person, probably not the bride, not the brightest, said, "How dare you change your last name to Jim Penman? You've always been Jim Mowing." So,
You just rattled their road now.
this one was actually a very real one. He said, "Sustaining a landscaping business. How did you do it and maintain it? I had my own one, but for some reason, I just couldn't expand in all areas. Hence why I stopped because I felt that there was no growth."
Okay, the point of a business is this: you've got to be there's a virtue which is strong in traditional Christianity, is almost unknown in the modern world. It's called humility. You've got to go in and recognize that you don't know a lot of stuff. The people who get into trouble are those who don't want to change. The one thing I have is I'm obsessively looking at everything I do all the time, every day, and saying, how can I do it better? So when I started off gardening, one of my first gardening was I used to charge $1.50 an hour, which is very little, even back in 1970 when I first started. Got a lawnmower, eventually charged $5 for a lawn. I just kept on learning and learning and learning and learning every day, every way, experimenting, trying to do different forms of promotion, different ways to turn, different ways of collecting grass, different ways of cutting edges.
Wow.
I just kept on obsessively on every day of my life. I look at what I do and say, how can we improve? And if you keep on doing that, and you keep on learning and listening to other people, you will get better.
Yeah.
The difference between somebody who is a failure and somebody who's success is so much you've got to learn. Now, I take somebody like the landscaper. I take my hat off to him. The fact that he was able to have any success at all is really impressive, because only about 5 to 10% of people, as I said before, succeed as independents. The difference with the Jim's franchise, and the reason why the figure is more like 88%, is very simple. First of all, we do screen, we do select, we will knock people back. If you want to have a franchise, you have to get a written approval from somebody who trials you to say this person is suitable. So we screen. Secondly, we have an intensive training course, which I'm part of, where you teach principles of customer service and all kinds of things. Very intensive, very high quality course. Very carefully regulated. We test and measure all the time. And then you have somebody go out in the field and they get a mentor, a coach who has to bring them regularly. And then they have regular meetings that they're supposed to attend. And then they get flooded with work, and they have a system. They haven't got enough work. You've got pay for work guarantee, where you can go and offer free services and we pay you. You have this whole structure that's set up to help people. So what it means is, if you come into us, if you have the attitude where you are prepared to listen and learn, you've got lots of people, your franchisor, other franchisees telling you, do it this way, don't do that. Yes, that's a mistake. That's why it happened. Try it this way. Say this to a client. Client doesn't want to pay you. Do this, do this, do this, do this. That job doesn't work out. Here's a solution. So you've got a whole community. And every one of my franchisees has my phone number and email address, and they can contact me anytime, today, this evening, anytime. So I can contact it. I can put them onto Joel for social media. We can talk to the IT about problems with technology, anything. They've got a whole range of people helping them. And that's the difference. It's extremely difficult. There's a guy who sits behind me in church who's got Mike's Mowing, which is good. He's
Oh, no way.
promoting his business. The point of it is, but he's succeeding actually. He only makes about half what my guys do. And I said to him one time, you should really consider a franchise. But the point of it is, we're still working, and I give him advice at times and kind of try.
Not too much advice, obviously.
No, I do. I'll give it to anybody.
Yeah.
We actually said, upon you want to run a business, come to our training course. It costs you about $800, and we'll tell you all of our secrets. You don't have to do it.
What's a general? Because I have my own business that is not a physical service. I do web and graphic design. What's like a general business advice that you have for somebody running their own thing?
Okay, you've got to listen very carefully to your customers all the time. What are they saying? Don't give yourself any excuses. If you've got a customer who's not happy in any way, how could you have done better? What could you improve? Constant listen. See, one of the things that people find very strange that I do is I actually personally deal with every poor survey. I actually look at them and mark them off in various ways. Every survey that comes through Jim's that is not a good survey, I look at it and I test it to see what's going on, why, and then I try and work out ways to improve. I do it every time. I'm also the only person who can delete bad surveys or complaints if there's a reason for it, if they've gone back and fixed the problem. So I get really intensely involved with my franchisees, with my customers. So I'm always learning about what's going on. You've got to be really aware of what your customers are thinking and doing. What do they want? How could you have done it better? What's everybody else doing that's better? We don't look at that too much, but what can you improve? And you're never, ever, ever going to be satisfied with anything. No matter how good you feel about what you've done, what could I have improved? Could I have done a better job? Could I have done it faster? Could I have used better technology? Could I have done it quicker? What could I change the font? Could I listen to stuff? Listen to podcasts, listen to talking books, listen to whatever you like, read things, constantly learn more about even things that aren't particularly relevant. Can you be more disciplined in your lifestyle? For example, should you be starting to have cold showers? It's actually a great thing. Could you be fasting or eating regularly? Should you get to bed earlier? I mean, look at your own personal well-being, because the way you think depends so much on your life, your lifestyle. Exercise, very important, because your mind is clearer. I'm 72, and you can probably see I'm not slowing down too much. But a lot of that's just things like cold showers, exercise, controlled diet, 16/8 fasting, going to church, all kinds of principles behind what I do to keep my mind in really, really good shape. And I'm very, very resilient. If something bad happens to me, I spring back like that. Okay, what was the mistake? Let's not do it again. What can we do now? How do we do it? Bang, bang, bang. Obsessive concern, improvement. But keep yourself. But never, you don't compromise things that are more important. You don't compromise, no matter how short, you don't compromise on tithing, you don't compromise on church, you don't compromise on Christian principles. You know, a lot of the best things that I ever did, most of the really best decisions I ever made in my life were because what I thought was against my own self-interest. I'll give you an example. When I started franchising, I was up against a competitor that had 250 franchisees. They were huge. They terrified me. They thought they'd crush me. And I eventually decided, because they wouldn't let me sort of join with them in any way, I decided to launch in competition. But somebody asked me at the beginning how many franchisees I might have one day, and I said, well, if it really goes well, I might have 100. Now, why did I say only 100? Because my competitor had 250. They'd shown it's possible. But I said, there's one thing too. I will not accept any franchisee that I have any reasonable reason to think will fail. I will not do it because it's
You're
just
setting them up for failure.
it's morally wrong to do it. Now, I thought for that reason I would never be that successful. I honestly did. And that's why I said 100, because I didn't think I'd ever overtake this other company. But what I discovered was when I had that attitude, what I used to do, they used to come to me and they'd always go to talk to the other guys because we were the only two around in those days. And they'd say, why would I buy from you? You know, these people have got interstate, they've got this really fancy office in South Melbourne, you're running it from your basement, okay? So why would I do with you? So I say, okay, there's a few differences in how you operate, but
That's a very scary meeting.
It's a fancy basement.
wasn't fancy basement. I'd say,
The light flickers.
here's a list of all my franchisees with their phone numbers. What I want you to do is to go and ring as many as possible. And then, and here I was really being a bit precious, I said, go and ask for their list. Because I knew they wouldn't give it to me. Because the fact of the matter is, because I was so careful about who I put on, because I trained them, because I gave them so much work, because I looked after them and babied them, and really helped them so much, my franchisees sold my business for me. So by the end of the first year, I had 60, and I thought, wow, this is amazing. And then it just grew and grew and grew, and we're now 5,500. So, but the decision to actually do that was based on doing the right thing. It was the will of God.
Is there a certain fear though that comes over you when you see it growing at that kind of a rate as well? Considering, you know, you go, I'm going to have 100 because I want to do this right. You continue doing it right and it brings about 60, but then multiplies. Do you want to, is there a part of you that wants to limit that because of the fear of any quality decreasing?
No, limiting growth doesn't make any sense to get good quality. Putting more people on is good actually because the more franchises you put on, generally speaking, the more work per franchise. It's just the way it works.
Right.
If
That's
you
very
see,
interesting.
If you see 10 trailers and you advertise, the advertising budget gets 10 times bigger, you don't get 10 times the jobs, you get 20 times the jobs. That's just how it always works. We always find that because it's like television. Nobody puts one ad on TV, do they? They put multiple ads. But the repetition is so much more powerful.
Right.
It's the same thing with trailers. So actual fact. But what it enabled me to do with time was to put tougher and tougher systems into place. And one of the things I check very carefully is complaint rate. So, for example, when I had a previous business, I used to boot up and sell lawn mowing grounds. For every 100 leads, I would have like 100 complaints. It was pretty bad. Franchising a lot better because they owned their own business. So I remember checking, we started to monitor complaints very carefully, and it was much better. It was like 5%. For every 100 leads, we get 5. So I thought, okay, this is not good enough. So I started putting systems of complaints and systems to sanction and to warn people who got too many complaints. And then put a survey system in where with better technology, where we actually ask customers. And then we improved on that and kept on putting more and more systems in place. And the level of complaints went down and down and down. Now, at the moment, it's a fraction of 1%.
Wow.
So there's been a more than 99% reduction in the level of complaints. And if you know me at all well, you have to say that I am really, really, really unhappy that we get so many complaints. We've got technological changes taking place, particularly in our program we call Jim's Jobs for franchisees. I am pretty confident that within 12 months we're going to be less than half that. Things like, for example, automatic systems which tell us when the franchisee hasn't returned a phone call. Systems which means if they don't return a phone call, they hit a button and it gives a message to the. There's this because I look at, so I'm constantly driven and working. And the fact that we've had more than 99% reduction in complaints it's good, but don't sit there. To me, why is there so many complaints? It drives me mad. What can I do? How can I improve it? How can we train better? I train the course that I give in training, I change it. The technology, I change it. there's exciting things happening because you're always, and when it's gone down to half, you're now going to stick there? No way.
Yeah.
I say, okay, we're now at 1/10 of 1%. Why are we getting so many complaints? Why aren't we 1/20th of 1%? You've just got to constantly, obsessionally push for better service.
Yeah. Wow. Constant improvement and now also constant expansion as well. Why just continuing to?
It goes together, right?
Yeah, I was going to say why all these different.
Well, the interesting thing about this too, I had a sort of a sense that it would, having better service would improve the, get us more work. But even I was absolutely flabbergasted at how well it worked. Look, in the beginning of gyms, I used to put half the money from every franchise sale into advertising budget. And it was so difficult to find work. I had teams of canvassers knocking on doors. We had trial kinds of things. Like that was the beginning of gyms. That's how we began to find work to feed my people. Eventually got to the stage where we didn't need to put the money in, so we could actually drop the price of the franchise, which is great. And then we got to the stage where did the advertising component, which is about $150 per franchise per month. In a lot of situations, there's too much because we've actually in the last year we've knocked back more than 200,000 leads. So we've actually had to cut back on the advertising.
Wow.
So in dog wash, for example, we've got about $150,000 worth of unspendable advertising. So we have to go back to the franchisees and say, what do you want to do with this money? So they've got a conference in Queensland all fully paid for and there's money, extra training, because we can't spend the advertising dollars. So you've gone from being spending way more than the advertising component, which hasn't changed much, to now we're spending less than we have to give it back. Sometimes we just give cash. Or we say, all your trailers, we stick it back. They have to decide. We can't do it.
Yeah.
We put it out to vote. What do you want? Do you want your trailers all restickered? Do you want a conference? Do you want training? Do you want this all paid for by this advertising budget? You decide. It's your money. We can't spend it.
Jim's dog wash was my last straw with you though. When I saw that, I said, "This man is absolutely everywhere." But I was like, it's great. I was blown away. I was driving one and like, there's no way. There's no way.
You saw it on the freeway.
We both look like there is no way.
Is that one of the fastest growing ones? I feel like I see that one like really often.
Yeah, dog wash and cleaning gone very fast. We've had a lot of troubles lately with dog wash because we had a lady who was basically had the rights to it, and she was.
Oh wow! Yeah, really.
And she was giving false, misleading statements. Like she was telling people they owned their trails when they didn't, their hours and stuff like that. So that's caused a lot of ruckus.
But it's definitely
it's okay.
There's a bunch that's on here.
I do have there's one of my mates on Twitter. This is prior to knowing that we're going to be here. Said, have we ever stopped to question why there's a gym service for everything? Is this normal to you guys? And then go through, there's Jim's dog wash, Jim's glass, Jim's conveyancing, Jim's antennas, Jim's plumbings, electrical, diggers, risky name, car detailing, security doors. There's the whole lot. What do you think the next one is?
Don't skip the jumping castle.
Oh, the jumping castles. That one is...
Jumping castles are
very small though.
Yeah.
We only got 1 or 2 franchises. We're not that proud of it yet.
Yeah, right.
They've got potential. Look, the 2 ones that are starting off right now, started beginning of August, is health services, which is, helping people stay in their homes, and also driving school. They're very exciting.
Oh, yeah, driving school makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But we've got both of them are particularly good from our point of view in terms of the potential earnings and the size of the market. The big one going now is Jim's Healthy. Actually, that's not so much of a franchise, but we're actually preparing packaged food because one of the greatest keys to successful life is eating well, and very few Australians eat well. What you need to do is to have the minimum of processed food. You don't have ultra processed food. You don't have too much sugar, salt. If you use oil, you use olive oil. You also need 5 to 6 serves of vegetables a day. Okay. Plus a couple of bits of fruit. That is Australian government guidelines. So we're preparing a range of foods which will be out. It'll be next year, in which means if you have 2 of these meals per day, 400-gram packet, you will have 6 serves of vegetables. You will have everything. It'll be 4.5 star rating. It'll be super, super healthy. And I've actually been trying them, and they're really delicious.
Frozen, fresh.
Happy to be for one of the tests.
We'll talk to Joel.
I am going to eat nothing else. Because I personally test every meal. And it's the stuff we've been doing trials for a few months now to get the recipes right. And it's going to be absolutely delicious and super, super healthy. That is the really exciting stuff.
That does sound very exciting.
Can we see that for sure? I was going to ask what's next, but you've already given us it with that.
I did want to ask something. I wanted to ask, I mean, you've done so much in like so many years, and I know it looks like you're not going to slow down anytime soon. You're very active in all of your businesses and even just with the franchises and the people. What's your biggest, I guess, accomplishment personally and professionally?
And if I can tag on to that, and what's your biggest regret in life or business or both?
Best accomplishment, my kids, honestly. Nothing that I do matters more than them. Even the research project that I've got is a better life for my children.
Yeah.
I love my kids, and it's so much of my purpose in life.
Yeah.
I'm very fortunate. I'm very blessed. I've got wonderful, wonderful children that are really, really great. And yeah, I mean that's an accomplishment.
Yeah.
And obviously my research matters a lot. I'm proud of what we do for our franchisees. I wish we could do better. I hate people failing. It really upsets me. But oh my goodness, regrets. Look, I have one principle. I would never, ever, ever undo any of my children. Okay? I love my kids, so I cannot go back. There's a film called About Time, about somebody who you go back in. He could go back to the past and he could change the past.
Yeah.
And he would tell something go wrong. And you go and change it. And at one stage, his sister got into a wrong relationship, and he went back in time to get rid of the relationship. But it changed his little girl disappeared. He came back, she wasn't there. So he immediately had to go back and undo it.
Yeah.
So I would never undo any of my children. Having said that, my marital history is appalling. I mean, for somebody with my kind of beliefs to be divorced 3 times is beyond belief bad. All right, I wish I could have been.
Yeah.
I wish I could have done better. So many women are rejecting me. You've got to be something wrong with me. And regrets. But I wouldn't change. I wouldn't go back more than 15 years. I wouldn't go back past the birth of my son. That's because all my kids are wonderful.
Yeah. That's beautiful.
A lot of business decisions I made bad. I mean, I've done stupid things like go into business I didn't understand. Like I opened up a fiberglass factory and tried to trade exchange, and I made some terrible mistakes in people I put on. We've had many problems with technology. We wasted millions of dollars on the wrong avenues with technology. I mean, there are so many business decisions I could have done better.
Always is.
That's funny.
But I am extraordinarily blessed. I don't think there's a happier man on the face of the earth than me, and I have an amazingly wonderful wife that I absolutely adore. I mean, 23 years of marriage, I'm just crazy for her.
We all ripped up like that. Hey, you've done all that.
Well, if you ask Lee, she will not tell you this is one perfect husband. She'd all be envious. Even though I adore her, we have really, really tense times. But that's amazingly good. At least take some of the disgrace away from my past.
For sure. I mean, we are not past. We are definitely.
How many kids have you got?
How many kids? Not yet.
Oh, you haven't got
I didn't want to annoy you by letting you know. I was going to let that one slide throughout the rest of this episode.
Not yet.
Well, come on, you three, get moving.
Well, I can't get moving just yet. I need to get married first.
No,
They need to get moving.
married first.
Yeah.
Let's not do out of wedlock. But you are a good-looking man, even though you were challenged on the.
That's why I make up for it. My head's upside down. My head's upside down.
It's upside down.
Good. There are so many wonderful Christian ladies out there who are just looking for a really decent man of good character. They really are.
Yep.
You want me to introduce you?
He's got one. He's got a great
You've got one. All right.
Yeah.
When are you going to marry her?
Come on!
Jim. Only once you start Jim's marriage.
Yes!
You better not put me on the chest. I might demand.
Jim, shake on it. Or fist bump on it.
Jim's officiating.
Seriously though.
Yeah.
You got the right woman.
Yeah.
You marry her and start having some kids. Don't delay that.
Yeah.
That's what life is about.
Hey, you're married. Have the kids.
This is the point that my mum
This
subscribes.
is probably the perfect person to speak because I'm ready. And I've been ready for a long time.
Good.
But Sir over there, he's trying to tick off a lot of accomplishments.
The annoying part is I looked outside and I saw my reflection.
So have you got a woman? You got?
That's what.
Oh yeah. You're married.
Married,
Oh well. Okay. This time next year, I want to see you both.
Oh man. Jim! They're done. Jim's. Oh, wait.
And we're
Is
gonna
there
call him
babysitting?
Jim's babysitting.
Call the kid Jim.
If there's Jim's babysitting by that time, we've got a plan. We've got a deal.
Well, you know, there's one of my guys, Dan Carl. He's a fantastic bloke. This is a guy who's a high school dropout. Bought a mowing van a few years back. Is now multi-millionaire. One of our top franchisors.
Wow.
About to open up the States for us.
Wow.
Fantastic guy. But you know what really excites me? This year, his wife gave birth to two twin sons. And you know what? Their middle names are David and James. And he said it's directly because of me. All right. Now that is to me, that's probably the greatest accomplishment of the last year that I actually got that happening. So I'm
Wow.
Amazing.
Dork! Dork.
Read some good news.
You're first. Well, let's
that's
get
us.
out of here for
Yeah,
sure.
we've told you for a long time. Jim, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening. If you did enjoy this episode, please like, comment, subscribe, share this around, and we'll catch you guys next week. Peace out.
Bye.
Bye.